Hello everyone. Borderlands is a series of first-person shooters developed by Gearbox that focus on gathering a ton of unique weapons. The series is the originator of the term looter shooter, or shlooter if you're feeling fancy. And I thought I would take an in-depth look at the three main titles of the series. The pre-sequel is still good, but I won't speak about it here. The games all have similarities in how they are designed and use the same fundamentals from the way that their worlds, gameplay, and leveling is handled, but with each sequel changing or expanding upon what came before. The fundamentals of the series include several hub worlds instead of a large open world, gameplay that uses the basic FPS mechanics with several playable characters, each with their own special ability and unlockable perks, with a decent amount of enemy variety with several human and animal adversaries, and obviously a fuckload of fucking weapons. I tried to keep spoilers to a minimum. I won't be discussing the story, but there will be a couple of the later areas will be shown, but all story spoilers will be marked. And with that out of the way, let's go. First thing I want to discuss is world design. The Borderlands games don't use a traditional open world, it instead goes for several hub worlds of varying sizes, which allows the games to be in total larger and more varied than most open world games. Some levels are miniature open worlds, while others are linear FPS levels, which I found to offer some of the best combat encounters of the series. There is a good structure to the game since you don't have access to everywhere from the start. This means when you're told to go to a new location, you're likely near the recommended level, so you're never over or under powered. But these levels don't offer any sense of freedom or exploration, and there is very little incentives to do so. Enemies have set areas where they spawn, and you will likely go there for missions anyways. And with the exception of Borderlands 3, there isn't anything worth collecting or searching for. And I would argue that Borderlands 3 tries, but fails, to give you any reason to explore. What 3 does is have 3 audio logs scattered around the map. If you collect them all, it will open up a chest. This chest doesn't always contain great weapons, and most of the time I found that I could get better weapons from just playing the game normally. Also, a personal gripe I have, the voice of Typhon de Leon I found to be grating. So having to listen to his goddamn voice is another reason not to go after these audio logs. Nothing against the actor, I just can't stand his voice. Also, I got better weapons from the loyalty packages, which just ask you to kill enemies, which you're already going to do, because that's the point of the fucking game. So why should I go out of my way to get weapons that are worse than what I'll get anyways? There are special targets that offer weapons as rewards, but the same issue as before still stands. The only way that you can be rewarded in these games is through weapons, money, or equipment, and everything you do will reward you with weapons, money, or equipment. So going out of your way to get weapons, money, or equipment seems like a waste of time. I mean, you also get XP, but everything gives you XP, so same issue. This was just my observation from playing the game. The other games don't have anything like that. There is absolutely no reason to explore, and the world just becomes a commute between missions. There is a fast travel, but it is mostly used to get between different zones instead of traveling faster through one. And in the first 2 games, you can only fast travel at designated locations. The third allows you to fast travel wherever you are, but only to specific spots. While on the topic of traveling fast, some of the hubs are quite large and have vehicles present so you can move faster. Unfortunately, unlike other games with cars, Borderlands does nearly nothing with its vehicles. Unlike Rage, where car combat is a regular and enjoyable part of your commute. Car combat can happen and some areas do have more opportunities for it, but that isn't the norm. And most of the time you just drive from A to B, shoot some bandits at B, drive back to A. The car is just a means of transportation. Also, I find it really funny how weightless the cars are in the first game. It's a fucking balloon with wheels. How the fuck would anyone drive this?
You are such a jackass.
Alright, serious voice back. Getting around the maps is bland. All you have to do is hold up, whether on foot or in a car. There is some small vehicle customization, and 3 goes further by having different types of armor, wheels, and such, but if all they're going to be used for is as a way to move around, there's little to no gameplay benefit to doing so. Also, I find it funny that Borderlands 3 copied the hijacking that was in Halo 2. It took you that long to figure it out. 3 also added a ledge grab and a slide to your on foot movement, which don't sound like huge additions, but going back and playing the others, those are huge additions. There are so many goddamn times I wish for a ledge grab and it just isn't there. It makes the other games feel really old. The third does have a few levels that take advantage of the ledge grab ability to add more verticality to combat zones, which is good. And a lot of the different worlds do showcase a bit of variance throughout the series and have different themes and such. It's something the series has improved upon with each sequel. The first game just had sand and garbage everywhere, and each place is nearly indistinguishable from the last. The Mad Max influence is strong in this one. This is the first location that you will visit, and here's an area from the last DLC. Notice the difference? Cause I don't. Borderlands 2 immediately sets itself apart from the original by starting out in a snowy mountain and has seasons instead of the constant summer in the middle of Nevada. And 3 has multiple planets you can visit, and each planet has its own theme. You do visit Pandora, and it's obviously Tatooine themed with odd looking dogs. But there are also foresty areas, futuristic cityscapes, and more. The extra visual variety is definitely needed, but the main use of these worlds is to set up gameplay and combat encounters. And gameplay is what holds the series together. The game feels similar to other modern shooters in overall feel, but give them Master Chief's hops. These motherfuckers don't skip leg day, they got hops. Anyways, there are always 4 or more different characters that all have special abilities and perks that you can level up in various ways. Every character has access to every weapon and shield. The main way that they will differ is through their ability. Combat is overall pretty good, and a lot of the things around it help provide a better experience. It is pretty fast paced, and like I said earlier, some of the more linear levels do provide great combat encounters that allow it to shine. The gameplay isn't cutting edge because it's meant to be a little more accessible so anyone could enjoy it. It's similar in design to games like Diablo 3 or any game that's focused on grinding and collecting loot. They aren't trying to have the best combat system, but an enjoyable one that anyone can get into. And one of the key aspects of enjoyment comes from collecting loot. The combat is very dependent on stats, so you will always be on the hunt for better gear. Not to say that the combat is bad, I quite enjoy it, it's just created in a way to be very accessible and dependent upon gear. It does still have a few interesting aspects, like the health and death system. Health doesn't regenerate, and the game has one of the best revival mechanics. You have a shield that regenerates, but your health won't. Health kits must be found or dropped by enemies. The first had health kits you could store in your inventory, but the rest of the games got rid of this system. This health system is similar to games like Halo Combat Evolved, Halo Reach, and Bioshock Infinite. Yes, I had to mention Halo twice. The benefit of this system means you still have loss of health be persistent instead of a temporary setback, but you do have a grace period before it reaches that point. You will always have the shield to absorb the first few hits, which means that even if you are at low health, you can go into a firefight and not die instantly. Games with no regenerating health or shield can eventually run into an issue where the player cannot possibly win an encounter with how much health they have, and in games with hit scan weapons, that's a real problem. Luckily, Borderlands was smart enough to have this system, and it's one that I would like to see in more games, because it has the benefit of having some damage you can and can't regenerate from. When you run out of health, the series is a lot more interesting than other games. Once you run out of health, you will be put in fight for your life mode. In this mode you can move, but at a crawl, and shoot your weapons, but you can't use grenades or abilities. The first game is the only one that doesn't allow you to move while down, and it sucks. If you can kill an enemy or have a friend revive you in the time limit, you will come back to life. The first part of that is key, because most co-op focused games have the ability to allow friends to revive you. Like in Gears of War, when you go down in that game, you need someone else to come and touch you in the butt to get you up, and are similarly in a weakened state, but you cannot shoot or do anything but crawl. In Borderlands, you can kill someone to get back up. Therefore, you can save your fucking self instead of relying on someone else, which is great for solo players, which is what I am. And unlike in Rage, another game with a revival mechanic, getting back up in Borderlands can be pretty challenging, and the timer for this stage decreases each time you go down, making it increasingly difficult to revive yourself. Getting a last second revive feels incredible and tense. Contrast that to Rage, where every time I went down, I knew I can get back up and regain 100% of my health. This fight for your life system brings up a lot of interesting decisions during gameplay because there are times that you will have to get up close to a weaker enemy before you die to increase your chances of getting back up. It's by far one of the best mechanics of the series. Plus, if you do fail and die, your punishment is a loss of money, which can be a pain in the ass, but is an acceptable form of punishment. It's also not all your money, but is a decent chunk, enough to be noticeable. I love how the health and death systems work. It's something that I'm surprised isn't more popular, and these mechanics have been great additions to the combat. I wish that the different classes in each game added as much to the combat. Each character has one unique ability, and that is the main way that they will be different from each other. They do have perks that can range from increasing damage, more ammo, faster movement, but will be passive instead of active. Each character has access to the same weapons and shields as everyone else, so in terms of gameplay, they feel virtually identical. Also, the most powerful and noticeable perks will be saved for the late game, so you will spend a lot of time playing as characters that all play the same. Their abilities are interesting and a few are really helpful, but they are only used once in a while. The abilities range from direct and indirect moves. Characters like Mordecai, Gage, Zane, and Flak have additional helpers that they spawn in. These provide you with an assistant that takes out enemies for you. It is not possible to directly control them, and they will go and kill enemies as they see fit. Contrast that with direct moves that you control yourself, like Lilith, Mose, and Maya. These can be something small, like Maya's phase lock, or big, like Mose's mech. Either way, you control these abilities for a certain period of time. Both types of abilities have their advantages. Direct ones give you more power for a short duration or a special move, and indirect ones have another helper to deal with foes. Since each character has one ability, the power of that character depends mostly on that ability, which means some are pretty unbalanced. The Necromancer has probably the most useful ability in Borderlands 2, while Maya can temporarily immobilize one guy. Gage can have a robot helper that will kill other enemies and can shield you depending on how he is leveled up. Maya can stop one guy from moving for like 5 seconds. I think that overall, indirect moves are more helpful. They don't change your combat abilities, but give you more potential damage on the battlefield. These abilities help in a variety of ways. They can take the aggression off of you because enemies will shoot at them. If they kill an enemy, it revives you if you're in fight for your life, and just have more uses than a single situational ability that usually replaces your combat options. An example being Lilith's ability, that is helpful for defensive situations as it makes you invisible, but you can't shoot or attack as it will exit the ability. Guys like Brick totally change how you play since they introduce new attacks replacing your guns entirely. Not all of them replace your options though, and I think I might prefer the indirect moves as I am typically a solo player, and I think they might be more helpful in that scenario. Each character is different, but all are similar in how they level up. Everyone has 3 paths for upgrades, each with a specific focus, whether it be an increase in ability power or something else. Because of how large the upgrade paths are, you will need to focus on one tree to reach the end of it, because you can't get everything. You can in the first game, but that's the exception. This brings up a lot of decisions on how your character build will be, and every time you level up, you must think carefully before committing a point. Borderlands 3 does change a lot of things about how these systems work. They allow you more options for customizing your abilities. Mose can change the weapons that are equipped to her mech, and she can add perks to those weapons. She can have miniguns with different elemental abilities, flamethrowers, railguns, and a ton of different combinations. The base ability doesn't change, it's still a mech, but there are things you can change about it on the fly. These perks can be switched around whenever. New perks are unlocked by spending points on the skill tree, so there is an incentive to upgrade along multiple paths to unlock the perks. And the different ones can be useful in a variety of situations, such as against an enemy that's weak to an element. The other games do have perks that you can add to your abilities, but they are permanent and can't be moved around. Zane is probably the most interesting character the series has made. he can have 2 abilities at once at the cost of using grenades. And he has 3 potential abilities he can choose from: a clone, a drone, and a shield. He has a ton of things to think about in and outside of combat, like what abilities to use and which one is worth taking up a grenade spot, or if any are. If you do take 2 abilities, should you set them off both at the same time to maximize damage or offset them, and much more. A small detail that I love is that Borderlands 3 puts the level cap to 2 before you can get your ability, instead of 5, which was the standard before. That's not all to leveling though. The later game introduced badass tokens that offer small but permanent stat increases. 3 doesn't unlock this until after completion of the game, and has these bonuses carry on between characters. Honestly, none of that matters because obviously we are here for the guns. That's why we're here, right guys? There are millions of unique weapons, and new ones are constantly found or dropped by enemies. But you can only equip up to 4 at a time. At the start, it's only 2 at a time, and somewhere in between it gets to 3 at a time, which isn't a lot. 3 got rid of the quick mapping of guns to the D-pad, so I think they should have added something like this to still quickly select guns. Every weapon falls into one of these classes: pistols, SMGs, shotguns, assault rifles, snipers, and rocket launchers. The first game added iridium weapons and separated pistols and revolvers. The series can create all these unique weapon variations by changing a few key things about them: their stats, damage, clip size, accuracy, and such. Perks. Most of the time these can be simple stat buffs, but they can also include throwing your gun like a grenade to reload, or different firing modes, to weird shit. You know what I mean. The weird shit. Like this shit. Or this shit. Or that shit over there.
Pick the wrong fight.
The shit that makes you go, that's some weird shit. Each game adds onto the perks that are available, and some are incredibly powerful, such as the one that provides infinite ammo. The last way that guns will differ is through elemental effects, which is a lot more rare. A majority of the weapons will not have elemental effects on them, and the specific elements for each game is different, but there are always 3 that are consistent: Incendiary, Shock, and Corrosive. These are damage modifiers with a specific use for each one. Incendiary is highly effective against flesh, but weak against shield, in contrast to Shock, which rips through shields effortlessly. And Corrosive is helpful for armored enemies. The other elements are just simple damage increases or status effects. Each game made little changes to the basic weapon blueprint, but many things are similar throughout. The higher level you go, the better the weapons get. I know, shocking, right? And the most powerful weapons with the most useful perks are typically the rare purple or gold weapons. There have been a lot of things that were added. Borderlands 2 added the grenade reload and had some weapons switch firing modes while aiming down sights. Borderlands 3 is the king by far. This game has the most unique and varied weapons that provide a ton of interesting choices and a few tactical options. They keep all the perks and possible changes from the previous games, but add on to them. They still have some weapons that could change firing mode, but they have this be something you control yourself instead of being controlled by aiming down sights. You know how it works in every other game. Other weapons can become different weapons entirely, such as an assault rifle that has a shotgun attachment, which was one of my favorite combos. And something similar happens with elemental effects. Some guns will allow you to switch between 2 elements. This gives you new things to think about when you find a new weapon. It's not just the basic stats, but the perks matter a lot more, and so do the manufacturers. Each manufacturer varies in how the guns will handle. I won't go through them all, but the most interesting ones are as follows. Atlas, their guns send a tracking dart, which will allow your weapons to lock onto targets without aiming. Maliwan, These guns have a charge up duration before they start firing, but most of the best elemental weapons are typically Maliwan. Honestly, a lot of this isn't new for the series or in general. Different manufacturers existed before in previous titles, and other games do have guns that transform, but nothing compares to the sheer scale that Borderlands 3 operates on. These things are far more noticeable now. All of this meant that Borderlands 3 has by far the most interesting weapons of the series and provides the most tactical options during combat. Let's not forget about grenades and the rest of your equipment. Grenades have a ton of variety and different classes, each of which have something special about them that changes the way you'll use them, such as longbows that will teleport to a spot that you're aiming at no matter how far away. Contact grenades will have you aiming for direct shots, and so on and so forth. Grenades also can sometimes have their own special brand of weird shit. The type of grenade you choose will affect how you use it. They are made in a similar fashion to guns but pale in comparison to the guns in terms of sheer variety. There are also shields and different perk cards that you can equip to your character. All of these things provide a ton of variance in what you are using, but what you're using it on is just as, if not more important. So let's talk about enemies, and the games are pretty good in this regard. The enemies will either be bandits or wildlife and come in two potential forms, normal and badass. Badasses have more health, are larger, and deal more damage. A lot of bandit enemies fall on the spectrum of guy with gun or melee weapon with varying degrees of health, but there are at least many different versions of that. Wildlife is more varied and interesting with a ton of different animals, each with unique attacks, weak points, and behaviors. I'll give some examples of each. Attacks are pretty simple. Each one will have different ways that they will attack you, like bullymongs, which are monkeys with several arms, and some of them launch piles of snow at you. There are literally T-Rexes in Borderlands 3, which is kinda fucking funny, and will bite you. I think the weak points for a few are quite interesting. Like the skags, they don't have a weak point on their head because their mouth is their weakness. So you have to time their bites and shouts to maximize damage. Spider ants are also a great example of interesting enemy design. They have a hard front-facing shell with a soft spot on their ass. Constant headshots will eventually stun them, but it's easier and far more effective if you try to flank them. There are these Rocky Boys in the second game that have crystal spots as their weak point. I like these vulnerabilities because every game has conditioned us to aim for the head, so having to aim somewhere else that's a little more hard to reach has these enemies stand out as unique. You have to deal with them in a slightly different way to all the other enemies. Something else you'll have to think about is the behavior of the wildlife, such as the Varkins, that will occasionally run away to cocoon themselves and power up. But in this cocoon state, they are defenseless, leaving you a great opportunity to attack them. Borderlands 2 has stalkers that go invisible, the third has ratchets that will eat the ones that are dead to regain health. Even one of the bandit enemies is intriguing. The Goliaths, they go berserk after having their helmets shot off and will attack anyone that is nearby. Combat is improved from its enemy design because who you're currently fighting is very important. Most enemies have something to think about. Even if it's a guy with a gun, there are things to think about like distance, health, and which ones to focus on, because even standard enemies have variances. And wildlife are likely more varied because they come in packs that are easily identified by their surroundings. Skags always have these holes in caves, Varkins have these weird hentai tentacle mounts, I don't know how else to call them. When you're going to fight wildlife, you will typically only be fighting one type at a time, which makes it easier to focus on that one's specific characteristics. Most encounters are with bandits and have a ton of different types present. Each type brings something new to the table. Enemies like enforcers with their shields can be tough to get around. Psychos will always charge at you, and Nogs will provide shields for nearby enemies. The enemy design also carries into other mechanics like the fight for your life, because you will need to think about which one is the easiest to kill. Because if the only guy near you is a boss, then well, you're screwed. And let's talk about those bosses. Most of the bosses in the series go for the old trick of they are just making a normal dude and give him a large health bar, quirky name, and a spectacular introduction. So a lot of the time they end up being boring bullet sponges and not very memorable. I honestly can't remember most of the boss fights in this series, and I have the footage right here. Like, take a look at Skagzilla from the first game. What separates him from a normal Skag? His name, his size, his health. He attacks the same way as any other Skag, has the same weak points, and is indistinguishable from all the other Skags. The same with most of the human enemies, they just don't feel special. Also, a lot of them spawn in a bunch of enemies into the room with you, but I'm pretty sure they do that just to provide you with some enemies to kill if you go down. Borderlands 3 has slightly more interesting bosses because they have more advanced tactics and behaviors that separate them from the basic bitches. Like take Captain Trout for instance, he appears to be the same as the other heavies but has unique moves, such as his ability to switch between elements, his volcano orgasm, and fire orbs that send out in areas that would be perfect locations to camp. Agonizer 9000 I would say is a pretty bland bullet sponge with some amusing attacks. He sends out damage zones on the floor, has razor blades that come out towards you, and a few other tricks that all force you to stay immobile. I'll put a spoiler warning here. I will discuss one of the last few bosses in 3, so if you haven't finished it, skip to the timestamp in the description. Troy Calypso is a fight I think could have been great, but is ruined by several factors. I'll do the positives first. He has solid telegraphs, his attacks are projectile based instead of hit scan based, meaning you could theoretically avoid all his attacks. But he has so few attacks and so much health that you will likely learn how to kill him way before actually doing so. He repeats the same attacks again and again. The fight has this very predictable rhythm to it. Troy sends out some orbs, you shoot him, he runs away, you shoot these targets, he comes back, and he does the same shit again and again. I think he could have been the best fight of the series if he was given a wider set of moves, since he just repeats a lot of the same sequences ad nauseum. Alright, spoilers over. Honestly, I don't have much to say on the boss fights. Some are okay. I think the combat encounters with a ton of standard enemies are more memorable than any boss has ever been. Overall, combat is good. I won't say it's groundbreaking, but does have a few ideas that connect to each other. The base gunplay feels smooth, and the health system makes for a nice change of pace in comparison to most FPS titles. Each character could have been designed with more active abilities, but the intensive leveling system with a ton of perks mean that there is a lot of decisions to make on character builds. And the guns, there are so goddamn many, and even if most of them are trash, the few truly great ones make the hunt worth it. But the stats do matter a ton, which means that skill isn't the only factor in success. Guns are only as good as what they need to shoot at, and there are quite a lot interestingly designed foes, bandit and wildlife alike. Shame the bosses weren't better. I won't say that the series is one of the best FPS franchises ever made. I think games like Halo, Titanfall, and Doom have better gunplay, but what the series does, it does pretty well. Because the focus of the series isn't depth, it's variety in all aspects. Those other games have less guns but offer more impactful decisions on which one to use. Borderlands focuses more on just giving a ton of weapons that all get the job done. And the biggest decision is which one has the highest stats, the best perks, the most powerful elemental effect, and even the best guns will become obsolete with time. A problem with having a ton of weapons is that there is almost no synergy between them, as every weapon must stand on its own instead of being designed as a large part of your arsenal. Overall, the gameplay is just good enough to be enjoyable, but don't go out there expecting a ton of depth. With the base gameplay out of the way, let's look at the mission design next. The missions are all pretty standard. I guess it's better than a game like Destiny, because even if you are doing samey missions, it's at least a little bit better than doing the same mission over and over again. But the missions are pretty much go to a place and kill some bad guys. The only use of the missions is to force combat encounters, and rarely try to make them about any kind of test of skill. Which is why I said that gameplay is what holds the series together. Everything you do will come back to two main aspects: killing bad guys and collecting loot. The missions are just the vehicle used to get you through that cycle. Some will have interesting setups or jokes throughout them, but will involve the same few steps. You go to the objective, you'll either have to kill everyone or grab an item or two, then you collect the loot and turn the mission in. Some missions will force you to complete multiple objectives, but will still be the same cycle. A few of the main missions try to turn up the spectacle a bit and are more memorable because of this, like this vehicle chase on a moving city. The series has tried to mix up mission types, but those mostly suck. Exhibit A, Scavenger Hunts. You go around a mostly empty place and search for weapon parts, and I'm glad they got rid of them in 3. Exhibit B, Timed Missions, that ask you to deliver some stuff quickly. They're acceptable, I guess. The driving isn't really that great. The first game had one mission type with a long-lasting reward, the Claptrap Revival missions. These are highly beneficial as they are the only way to increase your inventory space. The other games have you purchase larger backpacks. I think other missions should have awarded permanent stat increases to further incentivize doing them. Later games added optional objectives with extra benefits for doing so, but they are just additional objectives and not a unique challenge. It's always the context around the missions that is more varied than what you will be doing. Such as this mission that has you play an unfinished early access game with shitty microtransactions and a ton of bugs. Why did I write so much fucking S's in that fucking sentence? For those of you at home, that took me 15 tries. Getting back on track. That mission has a pretty funny setup that got really annoying by the end of it. Shut up, you dumb bitch, there is no one here.
Hey, listen, I'm under attack.
By fucking who? Also, if you're gonna talk shit about buggy games, don't have bugs like this happen at launch. Also, 2K is one of the worst publishers in gaming with exploitative microtransactions in their games. So far, you've done a good job with microtransactions, and I'm proud of you, so don't fuck it up like other 2K games. Also, escort quests suck dick, so don't make me do one. Another notable mission from the same game is a game show to get Vaughn laid. So yeah, context around the missions can be good, but the actual missions are pretty samey. But since the missions are just used for guiding players into the combat, it does its job well, but doesn't provide something compelling. There are a few details I want to talk about that I couldn't find a decent spot for. Borderlands 3 has a lot more character for its characters because they speak a lot more. I find it weird how little personality is given to who you are playing as in the previous games. Like from 1 to 2, it seemed like all the personality that could have been implied from the protagonist is now shown in the story. And speaking of the story, the Calypso twins in 3 have got to be some of the most annoying, uncharismatic villains I've encountered in a while. Handsome Jack wins best villain by default because he is actually memorable, unlike whoever the fuck the villain was in the first game, and isn't irritating like the twins. The death animations in the first game are pretty great. With enemies' heads popping off in a shower of blood, it definitely elevated the combat for me because of how powerful my guns felt. The later games added iridium as a secondary currency. 2 has you buy increased ammo capacity and backpack space, and 3 allows you to buy cosmetics and weapons, which means I never use iridium in 3. The third also has one small detail. When you go down and fight for your life, if you're currently reloading, the game will cancel your reload. The other games don't do that. I think that's all the random thoughts I had. Alright, so that's the series for the most part. The series is my personal favorite in terms of the looter shooter genre. The combat is pretty solid with good fundamentals and interesting ideas of its own. Variety is really where the game succeeds, not only in its variety of guns, but different locations, missions, and enemies. This variety is what makes the games engaging to me. And I have to commend how much content the games have, and the DLCs that have been released for the games add quite a lot of content. 3 is a great sequel that does so much right. It takes the basics from the previous games, removes some things that don't work, like scavenger hunt missions, basic bullet sponge boss fights, and movement. It expands upon the good that came before it with better and more varied guns, it has different planets to travel to, and even small quality of life changes are greatly appreciated. Such as picking up ammo automatically when you open the chest, fast traveling wherever you're at, and switching to active mission without having to navigate the menus. These are very much small but welcome changes to the game. And 3 even has a few new ideas of its own, like the way they handle the perks for leveling up, and being able to switch them around at will. There's a lot of little things I could talk about, but I'll leave it at that. Borderlands 3 is what sequels should try to be, and it's in my opinion the best game of the series. But the whole series is worth playing. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Feel free to state which game is your favorite and tell me why in the comments below, and I'll